Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, MtoA 207, I will be talking about how to create a rock or sand shader. It's pretty much like more like a dusty rock shader, as you can see in the reference images I have here. So I'll be showing you how to do that. You might wonder why 207, because my last tutorial was actually 528, as you can see on my YouTube channel. The reason for this is my Material Series, which I have started a long while ago, actually started with 200. So 201 was my first Material Series I started, and I will be just continuing that trend. So you know, it's a Material Series or a Material Study, so it will always be a 201 or 203 or 207 number. My most recent one was about snow and ice, which is this tutorial here, which gained some traction on social media pretty recently. And we will be using pretty much the same principles. We will use a base displacement to get the rough shape, and then we just be adding more and more detail to this. So as you can prepare yourself, we'll be using these kind of techniques. Also, I am on Instagram. I have my account here. You can see my profile name. I'll be posting social stuff like pictures of dogs, for instance, but also there's like occasionally 3D renders. I will do some pictures with my Nikon Z6, and just, yeah, if you want to follow me there, I'm also posting stories, digital assets. And my main thing is I have my Patreon channel, where I am hosting some support, some quick chats, maybe some one-on-one help, some mentoring. And obviously you will also gain access to all the tutorial source files starting from MtoA 501 and recent based on time. So obviously you will get also the source files for this tutorial on there. So I also have the mentorship private lesson thing. So if you need some specific help, we can work on something together, and I can help you with very isolated things for look dev and lighting. And obviously my Twitter account, where I follow people who post interesting things, and I do the posting of my stuff. As you can see here, I posted my work in progress of the same tutorial I'm working on right now. So before we jump into this, I just want to say that if you like what I do, please help me out on YouTube, subscribe to my channel, and obviously give me a thumbs up for this video, which just shows me that you enjoy the content I am providing for free for you. So let's jump into Maya. I will keep saving quite often. As you know, I'm working with live displacement shaders here, and you never know what is going on. So let's just have a quick look on the reference. So the main shape, the base shapes, what I want to create now is these broader strokes on the object. Here you can see we have some kind of a wavy pattern, and it's just a bit it's not perfectly round. So I just want to set this quickly up for you. Let's just make this guy straight like this, and let's just hook this up. So the first thing what I want to do is just create a noise pattern, AI noise like this, and then we have the live render going. Let's just stop this for a minute and just create our displacement shader like that. Delete the shading engine and hook these guys up. So we want the red into the displacement, and then the out of that will go into my shading engine. Let's change the render debug shader to basic and hit render. Takes a bit of time to subdivide, but once that is up and running, we should see something being displaced here. So let's see. There we go. So this is now my displaced sphere, which is obviously way too dense in terms of the displacement map. And I think before we get into final renders, I just want to adjust my displacement to be off, because the mesh itself is subdivided quite a lot. So I just want to don't waste your time in waiting for subdivisions to happen. So I want to introduce those rough shapes, and we want to use that with a little bit of detail, not too much, and we just and a bit of distortion, which is just kind of breaking up the default patterns of a noise pattern. You can see that a scale of 1 gives us this high frequency, so I just want to reduce that to maybe 0.1, and let's see what that brings us if I start the render now again. It should be a bit faster to start up because we do not subdivide, and you can already see now that it's definitely broken up. We can see now we get these wavy patterns. These bigger things are now here. It's not that pointy anymore. And we have some issues with the mesh. That's just because of the UVs, but we will ignore this for now. And we just care about the shape. And I think the shape is pretty good. It's nice and broken up. And so the next step would be to add these bigger cracks. And we want just stuff which goes inside. And our default value for the displacement on default is 0, which means a value of 0 will not displace the object. So I want to change this to go to 0.5. 0.5, which means a gray value of 0.5 will not displace, higher will extrude, and lower will go inside the mesh. So if I change this now, the displacement map should change too. And you can see now we pushed everything in a bit. So it's still a good effect. We just got it to the original shape now, which is perfect. So the next thing what I want to do is I want to create these broader holes and breakups everywhere. So I'll be just creating a new AI noise. And we kind of know now that a scale of 1 gives us these kind of shapes. And we pretty much want the same, maybe not as small. So maybe that's to 0.2 instead. Like that. And we want to introduce more detail to this. So let's do octaves. It's kind of like layers, like the more detail. And I can show that if I just hook this up to my ID slots, which I just use for temporary isolate selected modes, which do not work because I have the lock here in the bottom. Let's try again. There we go. So this is now on 6. On 1 it's pretty less than almost no detail, and on 6 we have nice detail. So what I want to do now, I just want to multiply this map with our existing one, which looks like this. So if I multiply, every value which is darker pushes into the geometry, but we now have also these grayscale values, and I want to clamp them. So if we multiply something with 1, you should know that nothing is happening. So I want to create a few values which are clamped to 1, so I do not actually apply the displacement on those. All right, and I'll do that by connecting a range, and I enable smooth stepping, which is the clamping. And now what I want to do, I just want to reduce the input max and reduce that number. So now a value of 0.59 will be clamped to 1. And you can see at the bottom the values here. These are now all clamped to 1, and we have a few ones which are lower than that. And if we want to push this further, we can just increase the input min, but I think for now we just leave it as it is and just hook this up with a AI composite, or you can actually use an AI multiply, because that's essentially what we want to do. Multiply two colors together, multiply this with that, and let's just actually, before we plug this into the displacement, let's have a look what that looks like. So you can see a value of 1, because it was darker there before. We are not touching this. We are just multiplying these darker points there, and there. So it's only in these locations where we are multiplying this. So now let's hook up this to the displacement and see what that brings us. It takes a bit of time. It's resubdividing. You can see something happen. If I go back to the basic mode, we can now see we have these nice little chunks being cut out of the mesh. And this is pretty much these kind of shapes which I was trying to achieve, like these kind of dents here and there. And we still have these clean surfaces, which are great, because we also have on the reference, if I find it, do I find it? Is it not in here? I might not have added this, or is it just not there? We have some kind of like little bulges everywhere. Let's see. It might have been actually this image. Yeah, it might have been this image which was just flipped. So we just see these broader little holes everywhere. So what I want to do next is just introduce some kind of little bumps. So the straight surfaces here are not so clean. And what I want to do there is I can just multiply some kind of high frequency noise with everything again. So we have a few multiplies here and there. And I'll just create a new AI noise like this. And this should maybe stay on 1. We just add a lot more detail to this. Maybe try 8. And we will just be multiplying this. Let's do an AI multiply, and we use the same technique we did before, and let's just sample this region here. And now let's hook this up to the displacement. It should look super strong and wonky now, like that. So that's definitely way too much. And the cool thing now is we can just, because a value of 1 means nothing will happen, we just have the control now to change our scale by just removing the blackness, the darkness of that map. So if I changed the minimum value to maybe 0.6, oops, that didn't work as expected, 0.6, the displacement will update now, and we should see a less strong effect here. And you can see now we get our almost straight surfaces back. Let's just maybe go a bit higher, 0.75. And now we should start seeing that it's almost clean again. Like all these flat surfaces are not that broken up anymore. And we might still have some kind of modulation, which is great. So we see these the greater shape, we see these more detailed holes, and all I'm missing now is these deep chunks of breakup. And this is now what we will be creating. We will be trying a few different things, and this is mostly me playing around. So we have an AI cell noise, which is pretty cool. If I hook this up into my ID slots to use it for isolate selected, and they have something like cells like this, and you can see we almost have that shape. It's just very sharp. So what we can try and maybe look for this alligator, add some details to this, so we can actually try to use this instead, because this is a bit more broken up, and we can try to change the lacunarity on this. And now we can see we get some very interesting shapes. It's not that sharp lines anymore, and we can, I'm not sure if density works with this, I don't think so, but we can play around with the scale. We can go maybe a bit lower like this, so we have a bit larger chunks. And now I can just hook up a range, AI range node, and hook these guys up. And now we can see, if I play around with those values, if we can isolate them a bit so it's not so uniform. So let's just bring in some clamping here. And this, you can see, this might actually work already. Obviously, we need to invert this. So whatever is white here should be black. So we can just flip the input mins and maxes. And now we see that we get some darker values everywhere. And obviously, you can play around and see if this is better. So let's just use this and just multiply that again. So whatever is white will not be touched, and whatever is darker in value will push stuff inside. This is, you should know that by now, that this is the kind of technique I'm using for this tutorial. So now I have my multiply set up, and let's just hook these into the displacement shader and see what we get now. If I change the mode to basic again, you can see now we get these little things pushing inside. And this is totally what we see in here. We just need a bit more sharper pushes or like details inside. And what we can do, we can mess around with the range a bit more. Let's just see, this is now inverted. So I think if we lower this, we should see stronger dents. Let's see if this is true. And yeah, we definitely see stronger dents now. So we have deeper holes. And I think this is pretty much what I was going for. One last thing though is, let's just try to use the regular cell noise with that hard edged cells, just because it has a nice little feature which the alligator one doesn't have, which is the density. So if I play with the density now, you can see that we get these random patterns, and it's not everywhere. And the same if I go 2.9, you can see now that we have a lot more white pieces than we have the darker ones. And this is what I want to do or get. So now you can see there's different depths as well because of the layers we used. And if I use this to multiply, we should also get some nice chunkiness going on. But I want to arrange this again just to help with the control of this map and the randomization. So if I now, again, as we did before, I just reduce the output input max to a lower number, enable clamping. So everything which is black will obviously get pushed in. But now I change my input max. So now only these parts here get pushed in. 0.3, only these little chunks will get pushed in, and this is a pretty cool effect. And you can see it's very close to what we see here actually on the left on the reference. We can just force the values a bit deeper, 0.1 maybe. So this is now pushing very deep inside this, maybe 0.05, 0.0025. Yeah, let's just try this and multiply that with our displacements. So let's just try the basic mode again. Like that. We have our range on the top. We do a multiply node like so, and we just hook these guys up. And you should be very familiar with this process now, how you can add detail with this kind of approach. So let's just hook up the displacement, and now we should see some deeper cracks going on. Let's see if that is the case. It's actually hard to see on this shader, but I think it's definitely there. Let's just change the mode to shaded and see how that looks. Okay, I was expecting a few deeper holes actually, but we can still see them. They are definitely there, and they might be just a bit too strong. But let's actually, before we change anything, let's just change the subdivision strength, or actually just enable subdivision in general, because we disabled that. And let's just see how that looks. All right, I think this might just work. It's maybe a bit too broken up here, but let's just work with this. So right now we have a pretty much, I'd say a working displacement map, and let's just jump over to the diffuse components, how we can create a very interesting diffuse color for this kind of shader. So on the base, you can see that we have this kind of white color or like sandy color, and then we have saturated orange here. There's some green, and we have these black top lines. So for diffuse, I like to use an AI layer RGBA, which is kind of a stack layer shader. Let's just hook this up to the base color and maybe connect a noise pattern to my input number 1. So you should see what's going on. And if I now enable isolate selected like that, and make sure that I lock it to this RGBA node by clicking on the little lock icon in the bottom corner of the Arnold render view, everything now which is connected to this node will get displayed as a texture directly in the viewport or in the Arnold render. So as I said, let's try to get this color working, the sandy color. So my whites, let's see if we can pick it, should be something like this. And typically these values are always a bit well, a bit too dark or too saturated. So let's just make them slightly lighter and also change the scale. So we want a pretty broad pattern like we had before, maybe 0.1 like that. And then we want to add details, maybe 6 layers. And I think this works pretty well. You can see these patches. So let's just pick this orange color. And let's just make this darker. Maybe more like in kind of that sense. The diffuse albedo is typically a lot darker than you would expect it to be. The shader on the left, or the reference I mean, is lit. There's lots of light on it, and it's reflecting as well. So always keep that in mind. You should not replicate exactly this color just because there's so many other influences on this which might change the look. And if I go to the basic mode or the shaded mode, you can actually see how different it is. And obviously we went a bit too far on the darkness, so let's just get in the base colors using the shaded mode. Let's bring some saturation back, maybe a bit lighter. I think this works now pretty well for the light color. We just need to change the saturation on the darker one, which is a bit more orange. Yeah, this is pretty good. I'm just looking at this kind of spot here on the left, and just to see this on the right. And I think this is a pretty good estimate of what we see on the left. So now if we change back to the isolate mode, we know now that this albedo is okay to work with. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. So the next step would be to bring in these little green patches, and I like to do that using another noise, but this time that noise will be driven for the mix of that layer RGBA. And I always like to create a range. So let's just hook up the color, the noise to the input, and then we open up this whole shader to show all attributes. And then I want to connect the output of this range to my, let's just think a bit, to the mix, which is actually at the bottom here. So we want to connect this to the mix number 2. So in here, if I enable layer number 2 and I change the operation to under, you can see now that we get this breakup going on. And we want to use that to modulate to green. So I need to change the scale again for the noise, and we can try maybe 0.1 again. And let's just use a different offset. So we just enter some kind of random values in here. It's just an XYZ offset, so we do not have the exact same values everywhere. And so let's just adjust the range and clamp it to 0 and 1, and maybe bring in some, change the input min to get some kind of clamping going on. So we have these isolated spots. And I think this might be a bit much, so let's just push it further and change the scaling or the offset a bit to something which works for you, maybe something like that. And now instead of just having a black color here, let's just change the mode to maybe soft light. And instead of having black, let's just pick this kind of green color and change it until we are happy in the shaded mode. Let's just do this, and it's actually pretty good already. We just just saturate this a bit greener, maybe like that, a bit darker, more saturation. It's almost like a fungus going on, right? So we have a bit yellow. Maybe we can even go a bit more in the blue and then desaturate. I think this pretty much works. So now we have these green spots, these guys, and we also have these white spots. So let's just do the same, pretty much the same workflow for this. So we create a noise, AI noise like that, and we use the range. So I always use ranges, as you know by now. It's just a lot easier to control everything. And we hook the output red to mix number 3. We change this mode, instead of soft light, we change this to to screen. And screen is kind of like a plus operation. Whatever is black will not get added, whatever is white will get added. So we can definitely choose the shape here or the detail. So we can have 7 layers. We can change the scale to 0.2 maybe. We can offset this in any direction you want, and then you use the range again to kind of push the details into one direction, so it's more isolated. Maybe we want white spots there, and there. And then instead of just screening this on top, I want to create another noise, but this noise will go into the input. So I create an AI noise, and this, as I said, will go into the input of layer number 3. And now you can see we have some modulation going on. It's not just a white anymore, it's kind of a broken up white. And if I add more detail, you can see now this breaks up even further. And I can now control this with the color here. So if I put this to black, it's pretty much off, and I can subtle fade it in until I'm happy. Let's see in shaded mode how this looks. Let's just bring this in, and I think a value like this is good. So we see these white patches coming up pretty much there, and there, which is a pretty good effect. And before we continue on the diffuse side, let's just push the roughness. So let's go lower on this so it's a bit more shiny everywhere. Let's see how that looks. And now we can see that there's some kind of sheen going on. And the shader definitely does not have it. It's super rough. So keep that in mind. We can also bring up the diffuse component, so the diffuse is even a bit rougher as well. Maybe something like that. Maybe 0.1 is better. And then obviously we went too far with the roughness. I think this is pretty good, so we can see some kind of response on this. And I think we might have gone a bit too far with the black spots or the darker brownish tints here. So let's just lighten these guys up like that. I think that's a lot better now. And the next thing is maybe adding this kind of fade. And this is like a pretty neat trick, which I like to do in shading. And this is using the world position or the object point position, and use that to mask out some kind of value. So I will be creating a state vector which reads the geometry points, and I can change the mode to P, and I can connect arrange again, and I enable clamping, and I hook up the out value of the state vector to the input of the range, and I hook this up to let's use input number 4 and change the mode to under. So now this is pretty much the effect which we see. And if I view the green channel, which is the y-axis, red is x and blue is z, you can see at the bottom here, let's just hide this, at the bottom here you can see the values change. And wait, just untick this. So now at the top of my sphere, you can see there's a value of 49, which is actually world units. And then the further I go down in Y, the value changes to 0. So I want to remember a value of 4950 or something like that. So if I enable clamp and I say choose input max is maybe the value of 50, you should see that there's no fall off coming. And obviously I want to also change the lower section. So this would be, I want a kind of a fall off for the top section, maybe 45 or a bit more, something maybe like that. And now I have my fall off region for my mask. And one last thing I want to do, I don't want to have a straight transition here. So I want to create an AI noise on top of this, which drives the input min. So let's just hook this up. Input min, like so. And I just want to kind of input the same values for my color slot. So I'm pushing the range back into this 45 region. So I can go 45 here and maybe 42 here, there. I mean, so I have 42 and 45, I think. And now you can see we have these kind of noises going on here. We can change the scale maybe to 0.4. Like that, and we can add some details, some layering to break up the shape. So now we have a nice little fall off going on, and we can totally use that now to drive the darker area on the top here. So instead of using this as my color, I want to use this as the mix as I did before. So layer 4 mix is this, which we actually want the green this time. This is important to not use red because we want the green axis, the y-axis. We need to hook up the green channel, which is now you can see what's going on. And instead of using the same map, we just want to connect a noise to this one more time to the input here. So now the noise is being displayed in that region, and we want to kind of get this, it's kind of like an iron corrosion. So I'm just trying to pick that color, something like that. And the other one is maybe a darker reddish one. Just make this a bit darker. Maybe something like this. for the top part, and I just want to multiply this instead of using the under mode. So looking for multiply, you can see now we get this darkening effect. And let's just change with the saturation on these guys so we get a bit more color back. More purple, and this one will be, I guess, more blue. Like that. Let's see how this looks in the shaded mode. And we can see it's pretty close to what we have there. If we just want to move that down a bit, we would need to adjust the noise patterns from maybe just lower those values. You can see now if I lower them, everything moves down slightly. You can see it's kind of now affecting it in the y-axis. Yeah, and if you feel that this is a bit too strong, you can always adjust your lightness of the multiplications, or just add another noise on top. But I think this dark section is actually pretty cool. It looks pretty much like a browning effect, or like burnt stone or something like that. So the next thing would be to add some kind of dustiness to everything. And I like to do that using a curvature and occlusion. And first of all, I want to use occlusion to actually darken these little holes and dents everywhere. So I'm go back to my selected mode, and I'll just create an ambient occlusion like this. Delete the shading engine which gets created, and hook up the red channel to mix number 5. And I just want to enable this layer 5, make sure it's on, and I just want to make sure our mode is to multiply, and we want to multiply with black, and we just now need to adjust the occlusion. So right now it's a far clip of 100. We just want to reduce that to maybe a unit of maybe 2, and we want to inverse the effect. So whatever is white gets black, and black gets to white, and now we can see that whatever is in close contact gets these little nice darker outlines. And this is pretty much all I wanted to do, is just to darken all these areas a bit, so everything gets a bit more crunchy and more detailed. And the other thing is I wanted to use curvature to highlight a few of those edges. So I'm just using the luminance red to mix number 6, and I just enable the layer 6 as well, like that, and change the mode to maybe screen. Let's see why we don't see anything. Is that correct? I think we might need to change the color to white to see something, and there we go. Changing this to white, you can see what's happening. All these edges get like an outline pretty much, and we just want to adjust the effect of that curvature by adjusting the radius, maybe 0.3 for this. And we also want to add more samples, maybe 6, to get more details in those curvatures. And I just like the effect of this, but this is definitely way too strong. We just want to dial this down quite a bit. So in the effect here in a layer, we just reduce the color to maybe half of this, maybe a gray. Let's see the shaded version, how this looks, if it's too weird. No, but I think it's good. It's good. So you can see that there's this kind of fading towards these edges of everything, which adds a nice little touch. I think this might just work. All right, so, and then last but not least, I want to tweak the shader a bit, and I like to get this kind of powdery, dusty look to everything. So what I want to do here is to apply a sheen, which is pretty much a velvety look to everything. So in the sheen tab, I just want to increase the weight to 1, so you can see what's going on. It's kind of like a facing ratio based colorization, and we just want a warm color. Let's just pick something in the ballpark of this reference here, something like that. And you can see just doing this helps quite a lot to sell the shader. It's a bit too strong on fully 1, so let's just dial this down maybe to half. And we should still see the same effect, the same velvety look on the edges. It just looks like, let me show you before and after. So this is now what we have. If I remove it, you can see how dark everything gets. So maybe a value of 0.25 is very good and gives us the effect we want. And now what I want to do is actually introduce some subsurface scattering. You might wonder why it's a rock, it does not let light through, but actually it does let light through. It not so much as a plastic or skin or wax, but it will still let some light through. So instead of using this color for the base color, I want to use this for my subsurface color instead. And to make use of that, you obviously would need to enable this by making sure that the subsurface weight is on 1. And now you can see everything gets actually very waxy and noisier for sure. You can see it's now cleaning up, and you can see now it is totally not looking right anymore. So what I want to do is change the type to random walk v2, and I want to change the scale to 0.05 maybe. So it's almost a diffuse shader with a slight amount of scattering just on the edges. And I want to use the same kind of sand color I used for the for the sheen. So let's just choose some kind of warm color here. Make sure the value is on 1. And this should kind of be pretty much that effect for the scattering. Obviously, it's hard to see it right now, but once I do the full final render, you can see that it's a lot softer, and it's not too soft. It's not like plastic. You still see it's super diffuse with the rock texture and everything, but it just feels a bit more, maybe organic is not the right word, but a bit softer, and it's almost as if you can touch it pretty much. And that's the effect you should be trying to go for. All right, so what I also then like to do is introduce some depth of field. This is just my habit of doing for these kind of tutorials. I have it set up already, so all I need to do is actually go to render settings and tick ignore depth of field, and just by doing that, you should see that these things are now out of focus. I focus on this area here and not so much on this. All right, so let me just start the final render and see how our result looks like. So how I like to do that is first go back to our shaded mode, change the mode to be progressive refinement off like this, go to our render settings, do maybe 2 camera AA, enable adaptive sampling on 8 and 6.5 is pretty good, and change our cores like that, hit save, and let's just start the render. So what I want to explain again is that all this what I'm doing right now can obviously be done in a different software like Substance Designer, or you can paint everything in Mari and stuff like that. So this is totally an option for you to do. And then the next question would be, why am I doing this tutorial? If you say, why don't you do it in Designer? And the reason for me in doing a tutorial about this is just so you can learn how to actually work with shading networks, how the logic is, how everything works together, especially using displacements, which can be very tricky if you do not know how they work. And I think this tutorial should help you just to understand that if your 0 value is 0.5, that you need to multiply values to get holes in your objects, or plus stuff to get some extrusions on top of that. And the same for the colorization, that I'm using the RGB layer stack and then stacking colors and blending them with occlusions or curvatures or noise patterns. So pretty much all this you do not learn in Substance Designer, and to be very proficient in other packages, you need to know how shaders work. And that is my main intention with doing these tutorials. And I hope this makes sense and is not like trying to put you off of anything. But all in all, I just want to show you guys techniques which are very important in this kind of industry. It's not about creating the best renders. It's to know how to actually achieve them. And everyone can say, oh, this shading ball looks so crappy and I can do 10 times better ones. And I'm happy for you if you can do that, but it's still a learning process. And Obviously I can also do much better than this, but this is just showing you the workflows and the ideas. I hope I'm being clear, and it's not too demanding, but this is just kind of my way of looking at things, and I hope this helps you. And if you enjoy what I do and in sharing this knowledge, I really appreciate if you like this video and subscribe to my channel, because this means a lot to me. And if you need more help, feel free to join me on Patreon and contact me over there, so we can get into a hangout or some kind of chat to help you out in a specific thing. Yeah, and as you can see, as the render is finishing up, we can see some very nice details now, especially on this section here in the front, where we can see these bigger, softer holes, and then we can also see this really crunchy, edgy cuts in it. And this is pretty much the cell noise multiplying with the alligator noise to get these patterns. And what I like as well is these whiter things, which we were using with the curvature, I think. It just feels like the shader is being lifted up, or as if the paint or the stone peels off slightly, or some kind of modulation going on. So let's just wait until the render finishes up. Alright, so 3 minutes 26 seconds and the render is done. I hope you can just ignore these black spots. These are actually some bubbles within the geometry, so just ignore those for now. They shouldn't matter too much. Let's just save this render under my snapshot folder. Let's just see, because I did a few tests, and unfortunately the render, I recorded the whole scene already and I didn't have my mic on, so I talked for 40 minutes without recording my voice, and I was really bummed out. So this is now my third attempt at recording this, so I hope this is good now. And you can see this is my progress. This was my initial test, which I showed on my Twitter account. These were the initial tests. And adding more detail, this was my second one, which was actually the official tutorial where I forgot to record my voice. So it's kind of a bit different pattern, but all in all it's the same idea. And then we have the one we did right now. So you can see they all look a bit different, but they all use the same techniques. So you can see that just by applying the same workflows, you can get totally different looks, which is not a bad thing. And you can see that I think the last one now, not this one, like this we did together, I think this one works very well in terms of the reference. It's not too far off. Obviously we can subdivide some more to get even more detail, but all in all, I think the idea is the same. So all these source files you will find on Patreon if you want to follow along, if you want to check out the shading network yourself, or you will get access to all other source files as well. And one last time, if you enjoyed this, please leave a thumbs up or leave a comment below or subscribe to my channel. Everything is really highly appreciated, and you know how much time I spend on these videos, so a little click on that like there is not a big ask for me. Cool. So thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next tutorial.